Welcome to the Red Shirts Fantasy Football Podcast with your hosts, Matthew Betz and Matt Okada.
We are back. What is up, Red Shirts Fantasy Football Podcast listeners? Matthew Betz, Matt Okada, back on the mic tonight. Excited to break down more rookies. It is officially Dynasty season here on the show with the Super Bowl in the rearview mirror. Okada, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Crazy. Things do not slow down, as I may or may not have mentioned at the NFL Network when the season ends. In fact, they get just as, if not more crazy, because we start doing combine and free agency prep, and then right after that comes the draft. And throughout the season, I was working post games mostly for my TV, and now I'm back to working normal total accesses. Accesses?
XI?
Yeah, so I had a bunch of total accesses last week, and it's a very different sort of life when you're working that than doing other stuff. So things are all changing in a flutter, and but you know, it's exciting because you think football's over, and it's not. Psych.
Yes, there officially is no offseason in the NFL or in Dynasty or in the XFL for that matter, because that's now a thing. Real quick, did you watch any of the XFL this weekend?
I watched a minute of a game one that I was passing by the living room that my roommate was playing. I actually saw a really great throw by that quarterback from Temple. Don't know who he was or what the team was, but it was really solid. And then I walked out the door, and I've seen a couple other highlights. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a complete junkie when it comes to this kind of stuff, so I was sweating out some DFS over the weekend. I am not too proud to admit that. Did earn a little bit of cash, which was fun, but yes, football goes nonstop around the calendar, and of course, like you said, Okada, there is no offseason. And with that in mind, we are talking Dynasty tonight. We are talking rookie wide receivers, and to do that, we have a very special guest on with us tonight, Ray Garvin of Dynasty League Football. Ray, what's up, man?
What's going on, fellas? I mean, I feel like I'm a small fish here. We've got NFL Network and all these other, I'm just Dynasty League Football. It's just Ray jumping on the pod. I'm excited, though. I too, watched quite a bit of XFL, quite a bit. I was very intrigued by it. And I can say I really think they put out a good product. And with the ESPN and ABC and Fox behind them, I think it's looking up for those guys. And it'll only get better when you actually start getting some of these college kids who just right out of college, they can't make it. They're not, quite good enough for the NFL, but they actually get a shot at the XFL. So I think it's only going to go up for the XFL. But excited to talk rookie wide receivers with you guys tonight.
Yeah, man, it's going to be a blast. And you mentioned you're just a small fish here amongst us, but hey, it's hard to turn on a podcast nowadays and not hear your voice talking rookies, talking Dynasty. So you have had a meteoric rise into what feels like Dynasty relevance, which is awesome, man. It's great to see for you and for people that follow your work. So it's awesome.
Also, let's be clear, no one hears my voice on the NFL Network. They just see the back of my head sitting over in the research pen. So
very true. So, Ray, for our listeners who may not know you or know your work, just give us a little bit of a rundown kind of on your history with fantasy football. And, I understand you are a former college player yourself. So just tell us more about yourself and where we can find your work.
Yeah, former college athlete. I played coming out of high school. I had a couple of Division I offers, Boise State, UNLV, Southern Utah, some smaller Division I schools. But I was a knucklehead in high school and got into some trouble my senior year, and those scholarships sort of dissipated. But a coach from Boise State knew this coach at Chadron State College, Chadron, Nebraska, little old tiny school. So they paid for me to go to school out there for a couple of years before I transferred to Texas Southern. Got a chance to play with Danny Woodhead. We were a part of the same recruiting class, so I know Danny very well.
I was just about to ask that question.
Yeah, we came in together, and funny story, man. If you would walk right past this guy right now and not think that he was an NFL running back.
Yeah,
I mean, he
that
just
sounds about right.
Looks like a regular dude, but he was by far the best athlete that I've ever played with and I've ever seen play live in person. So that was a great experience. And then just fantasy football, man. I've been playing fantasy for quite some time now and got into Dynasty about 5 years ago. And the only reason I started doing this, writing, podcasting, is draft season last year or the year before, listening to people give me advice, and I'm looking at these players. I'm just like, hell no. Like there's got to be a better way than this. There's got to be better content. And I'm not knocking anybody. I'm not, trying to make it seem like I'm all knowing, but I just felt like I could do a much better job having watched the college game, played a little bit to provide some different insight into these players. So then I started doing it and, got on with Dynasty Nerds and then with Ryan McDowell and Destination Debbie podcast. And then from there, man, I feel like I'm a young Kevin Hart. Back in the day, you couldn't turn on a movie and not see Kevin Hart in it, but he said he's the hardest working man in showbiz, or like The Rock, you know what I mean? So I'm out here just grinding, and I don't consider myself an analyst or any of that, man. I really don't. I just watch the college game and I share what I see, and some people believe and trust what I say, some don't. But my whole goal is just to give you an insight into these players because I am watching the college game every single Saturday. I'm watching high school football down here in Texas on Friday. So I just want to provide information for the people to do with it what they will.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And, Okada and I don't even want to say specialty because we're just a couple of guys who like talking football as well. But we definitely are more of a redraft focused mindset when it comes to this thing. So I'm excited to learn from you, Ray, and learn about your, wide receiver evaluation skills and what you see on tape with these big names. So tonight, man, we're talking the big names. Everyone's going to know these guys. They're round one talents in the NFL. Looking forward to the NFL draft. So Okada and I are excited to learn. We'll get into that in 1 second. Just want to remind everyone, you can find us online at redshirtsfantasyfootball.com. John Helmkamp putting out weekly running back scouting report, profile videos, and articles. Those things are fantastic. He is grinding the tape. Check him out. You can also find us on YouTube now. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. Everywhere that you find us on social media, it is Red Shirts FF Pod. There's not much news going on right now. It's kind of the dead time in the NFL. So we're going to get right into it, fellas. Tonight we're talking rookie wide receivers. We're going to kick it off with the top 5 in this class. Now, Ray, as the guest, I'm going to let you go ahead and give us the rankings that you have for these guys. But let's go in reverse order. So give us your number 5 on the list tonight, and then we'll go all the way down to number 1. Who you got?
All right, so this is sort of breaking news on this show because I've had a little adjustment to my rankings. So my number 5 wide receiver, and I'm basing a lot of this on upside. It's Laviska Shenault. I moved Laviska Shenault to wide receiver 5 in this class. I think his talent, right? If you're just talking about from a talent perspective, if he can stay on the field, and I say if with the biggest capital I and the biggest capital F that you can find in the world, if he can stay on the field at 6'2", over 220 pounds, the way that he moves, what he can do with the ball in his hands, his position versatility, carrying the ball, catching the ball out of the slot, being a commanding X wide receiver on the outside. I don't know if there's another wide receiver in this class with just the talent that Laviska Shenault has. He is phenomenal when you put the ball in his hands. Didn't do much his freshman season, but as a sophomore, he really exploded onto the scene for the Colorado Buffaloes. So if you're just talking about what he can do when, and I can't stress this enough, when he's on the field. And I typically don't like to deal with incoming players that have an injury history. Torn labrum, had some kind of foot issue. Every single game you watch Colorado play, when Laviska Shenault gets hit, he's like limping off of the field. It's sort of like, Julio Jones is always on the injury report. If you guys watch NBA, Paul Pierce, there was a game for the Celtics where Paul Pierce was wheelchaired off of the court and then comes back into the game later on. That's what Laviska Shenault reminds me of. So I just moved him to my wide receiver 5 this week, and I feel kind of gross about doing it, but I'm actually trying to acquire him in a couple of my Devy leagues right now. So I've got Laviska Shenault 5.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. I'm not sure if you're aware of my history, but I am a board-certified orthopedic specialist physical therapist, so I do a lot of injury analysis, coverage of that kind of stuff. I haven't dug into his injury history too much, but just hearing what you're saying, I mean, I agree with you. That definitely raises at least yellow flags from a a durability perspective. When you look at these guys coming into the league, I mean, you want to see them have a clean injury history like a Jonathan Taylor, other guys in the past that have been able to step right on the field and stay healthy is huge, not only for the NFL teams, but for our dynasty roster. So that is interesting that you bring that up. I'm definitely looking forward to looking into that more. Okada, your boy over at the NFL Network, Bucky Brooks, your best friend, put out a mock draft not too long ago for the first round, his first edition of it. He has Laviska Shenault going to my Philadelphia Eagles. And if these durability concerns are real, then I am worried. What are your thoughts on that fit with Philadelphia?
Well, I think my main question is, I kind of have heard, this is actually a name that gets tossed around the office a lot. So it's intriguing to me that you brought him up at number 5, because I feel like he's getting some buzz, which is a lot of what I go on, honestly, until I start getting into the tape fully myself, which I have not had a chance to do yet because the offseason doesn't exist. But I will get into it.
Give this kid a day off work, NFL Network. Come on.
But one of the main things that I'm hearing is that he may not be quite as polished as some of the other guys in this class, may not be as ready to, contribute as a number 1 receiver necessarily automatically out the gate. And I do wonder if the Eagles need someone who's really ready to step up and be a 90, 100 target guy or something like that because of how little they have in that core elsewhere right now. So I don't know if they're necessarily positioned high enough to get one of those guys. Maybe it is more a kind of situation where they get one of the secondary type players, or I guess 5 is not that secondary, but certainly he's below the tier of a couple guys we'll get to later. But I do wonder if maybe it's not the best fit for that reason, but
Right? Yeah, right. What are your thoughts on that potential landing spot?
Everything that I've heard, I'm a Cowboys fan, so I would be actually, I don't really want you guys to take Laviska Shenault. I really don't want those problems in the division for the next couple of years. But then again, a part of me is like, please, Philly, take Laviska because I know he's going to miss at least 4 games a season. But, everything that I've heard coming out of Philly is you guys need a field stretcher, somebody that's going to be able to open up the offense for Dallas Goedert, for Zach Ertz while he's there. You've got Miles Sanders taking those dump-off passes out of the backfield. So you need somebody that's going to, scream down the field and command that safety over top. I don't know if Laviska Shenault is that. I think Henry Ruggs, even, and I'm not the biggest fan of the KJ Hamler, but somebody with speed that will be able to open up that offense, help Carson Wentz out, help that running game out. I don't know if that's Laviska Shenault's game. I think he and Alshon Jeffrey and JJ Arcega-Whiteside, I think they're all sort of that big-bodied possession type wide receiver. Can Laviska get downfield? Absolutely, he can. If he's in the open field, he's got good speed. But I don't think he's in the same mold of a Henry Ruggs, as a Jalen Reagor, as a KJ Hamler. So I don't know. The Eagles just need a wide receiver. They can't roll out Greg Ward and company next year. So I really think any of these guys that lands on Philly would be an upgrade at the position, but I don't think that's an ideal fit for me.
Yeah, right. Not gonna lie, I think Okada would be an upgrade at this point to the wide receiver core there.
Hey, I'm 6'2", man. I could,
you got the size.
Catch a touchdown.
Yeah, that was rough to watch last year for sure. It's interesting that you bring Henry Ruggs up. Is he the player you kicked off your top 5? Because before show, we were chatting via our Twitter chat, and you said that was a good one to keep on. Is he out of the top 5 for you now that Shenault is in?
Yeah, he wouldn't have been in the top 5 regardless for me. Okay. So I know there's a lot of intrigue over Henry Ruggs and that speed and playing for Alabama and what he can do. But he's, I think on DLF's rankings, I think I have him ranked 8th for rookie wide receivers. So he's, even with, Laviska Shenault out of the picture, he's still not a top. I got him 8th. Yep, I have him 8th, behind Bryan Edwards, behind Justin Jefferson, and of course behind Laviska Shenault.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's close it out here with Shenault. Give us just one quick takeaway. Like, if there's one thing fantasy owners should watch for, what does he do really well? And then what is his biggest weakness outside of durability concerns?
He's a playmaker. Again, 6'2", 220. That was his listed height. So we'll see what he comes into the combine. Even if he's 6'1", he's all of 220. He may be a little heavier than that. He is just, I've called him a tank with the ball in his hands. When he catches it, defensive backs don't want to deal with it. I mean, He carried the ball 23 times this past season, 17 times the year before, 5 touchdowns on the ground as a sophomore, 2 touchdowns on the ground as a junior. If you look at his from an analytical standpoint, he hit 25% threshold for market share his past 2 seasons. So he checks the analytical boxes. He's physical as heck, man. I'm telling you, when he gets the ball in his hands, he's a 6'2", 220-pound wrecking ball, and he runs like a running back. And sort of that kind of attributes to his injury history. If I had to say his biggest improvement that he's got to get better on at the next level, it is refinement in ways to create separation. I'm not just going to say a route runner, because you don't have to be this route running savant in order to win at the next level. But Laviska Shenault has like one gear, and he's got to learn how to throttle it down, how to pick it up, how to be more skilled at creating that separation, which that's something he can learn. And I think once he gets in an NFL system, he can do that. But at Colorado, if you watch the games, it was just find Laviska, get Laviska the ball any way possible, whether it's put him at quarterback, running back, slot receiver, or outside. So he's got to work on his refinement and technique for the position.
Yeah, for sure. That makes perfect sense. That's a great way to close it out there with Laviska Shenault, your number 5 for tonight. Of course, that is subject to change. Let's move on to your number 4. Hit us with who that is, and then let's talk about his strengths and weaknesses.
Let's talk about the big boy wide receivers, because we all like those big prototype guys. And for me, the best big bodied prototype wide receiver in this class is T. Higgins, junior wide receiver out of Clemson, 6'4", 215, had a fantastic junior season. And what really just, made me feel so good about T is coming into this year, everybody was talking about Justin Ross. Justin Ross is a very talented true sophomore for the University of Clemson who had just an absolute tear last year in the college football playoffs. But people were sort of discounting what T could do on the outside. And all he did this past season was catch 59 passes for over 1,100 yards and 13 TDs. And he was the alpha. He was the 1A. He was Trevor Lawrence's best friend this past season. He's not just some big guy that just catches jump passes. He's really good in his route running. He has to be that size to create the separation that he does on the outside. I've seen him move him around in the slot, and he's tough as hell. I really like what Higgins brought to the table, and he does check some of those analytical benchmarks that we look for. This past season, a 29% dominator rating. His breakout age, he did that at 19. Over a 20% market share on that offense with Amari Rodgers, again, Justin Ross, and Travis Etienne. T. Higgins is a monster. I really like what he has, and he should be a lock for the first round in the NFL draft.
Yeah, and real quick, Ray, just before we move on to talking about his potential landing spots, drafts that we've seen, and breaking down Higgins in more detail, real quick, just give us a Cliff's Notes version for our listeners that aren't aware. Define market share real quick for us, and then dominator rating as well.
All right, market share for wide receivers, the percent of receptions and yards that the wide receiver had based on the other players on his team. So you want to see them hit 20%. Historical data shows that wide receivers who hit that 20% threshold more likely than not have success scoring fantasy football points at the next level. All right, dominator rating, that takes the total amount of a wide receiver's receptions, yards, and then touchdowns. I know a lot of the smart analytical people like Peter Howard, like Jesse Reeves, like Chris Bean, they don't really like using touchdowns because touchdowns is a very unsticky metric. Calvin Johnson had almost a 2,000-yard receiving yard season with 5 TDs. It's just not a sticky metric. So a lot of people look at receptions, yards, percent of that based on the overall team offensive production. You want to see those wide receivers hit 20% or get very close to 20%. As long as you're right there. Some places, I know RotoViz uses 25%, some places use 30%, but whatever that threshold is, you want to see him command a large market share of the offense.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's get back to Higgins and his potential landing spots. Daniel Jeremiah put out his mock draft recently, as well as we said Bucky Brooks. We've got 15th overall to the Broncos, according to Bucky. DJ has him going 22nd to the Buffalo Bills. Interesting landing spots. Okada, of those two, for Higgins, which one do you think he is a better fit?
I think the Bills is the best call possibly in this entire draft for Higgins. I think that makes perfect sense. Listen, we all know what Josh Allen is. He's a guy who can run, and he's a guy who can throw it deep. And he has a really great arm. It's not necessarily the most accurate arm, but it's a great arm. Can he improve and become more well-rounded in general? Probably, hopefully. I think he has a chance. But right now, what I know he can do is throw the ball up and throw it downfield. And the receivers that they had around him last year, the way that they would work that is just have John Brown or any of their other speed guys try to burn someone, and Josh Allen just throws it far enough that they can catch it in the basket and keep going. But what they didn't have is a guy who could make a jump ball catch, who could make a contested catch down the sideline, who could be a big red zone threat. I think T. Higgins could bring a lot of that to add to Josh Allen and to add to that offense that they didn't have last year. So that one makes a lot of sense to me, and I think could bring a big dynamic to what that team didn't have last year and probably take them up a notch to where they're a threat in the playoffs and not just, around.
Not just lateraling at the last minute of the game.
Yes.
Josh Allen.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. They definitely need a bigger body for sure. I agree with you on that on the outside. Ray, you like that call as well for Buffalo?
Yeah, love it. I think for wide receivers, I think this would make the most sense out of any wide receiver in this class. T. Higgins to Buffalo, it just seems like a perfect marriage. We just talked about it. Josh Allen, he can throw it far. Sometimes he can throw it accurately. But when you've got a 6'4" wide receiver with the wingspan, the catch radius of T. Higgins, you just need to put it in the vicinity of him. And then you've got Cole Beasley and John Brown. You need a big possession wide receiver that can really help not only Josh Allen, but think about what that does for Dawson Knox at tight end. So I think a wide receiver like T. Higgins, who, don't get it twisted, he could stretch the field. He's not this big, slow, lumbering wide receiver like a Kelvin Benjamin running down the field. The guy can get downfield. So I think T. Higgins to Buffalo, perfect, beautiful landing spot.
Yeah. Anytime you come on the podcast and you mention Kelvin Benjamin, I question things, Ray. So never again.
No.
Never Kelvin Benjamin.
Yeah, never Kelvin. But yeah, man, I think, the athleticism and the speed, like you were kind of describing, for our casual listeners, casual college football fans, I'm sure everyone tuned into the college football playoff. And if you watched the national championship game, I mean, the thing that just sticks out in my mind is him running down the sideline on that jet sweep, looking physical, looking athletic, elusive in the open field. So yes, the athleticism, I agree with you, is there. One thing that I noticed in a little bit of the tape that I have seen is he tends to kind of be a guy that I've seen struggle a little bit against more physical corners. Is that something that you've seen on tape too? And if so, do you think that's something that he can learn from and improve on in the NFL level?
I think that's a fair, and I'm not even going to call it a criticism. I'm just going to say that's a fair assessment, that you saw on tape. And I think for most of these guys, that is something that they have struggled with or will struggle with at the next level, because in college, man, those guys, for the most part, they're not challenging these wide receivers like that. They're so threatened and so scared that if I try to jam and miss, then it's lights out. So that's something that majority of these guys, there's a couple of players in this class who can create separation right off of the line of scrimmage. We'll talk about one of those players in a little bit, but that is something that at 6'4", you've got a lot of surface area to hit, a lot of surface area for these corners who aren't afraid of some rookie wide receiver to get all up in that chest. So that's something that he can learn, will learn, and he'll improve upon that at the next level. If that is the biggest criticism on any wide receiver, the tendency to let corners get in on them, that should not impact your decision whatsoever. I think that is one of the most coachable deficiencies that any player at the wide receiver position can have.
Yeah, fair enough. And I agree with you on that for sure. I think that's something that he can, learn from, and you get a little bit more, practice and, of course, get the reps under your belt. Yes, that can definitely improve. Let's put a number to it. If you were going to rank him amongst the other skill position players, let's say in a non-superflex draft, so we're talking one quarterback, your vanilla PPR league, right now, is he more of a mid-first guy? You going early with him? Where you at?
Probably late first, around pick 10, 11, 12, around there. I think he's still a first-round pick for sure, but later in the draft. I'm not taking him in the top half of a single quarterback league.
Yeah, love it. Let's talk about some guys that maybe you will take in the top or the middle of the first round. Give us your number 3 wide receiver.
All right, I'm ready for the disagreement to flare up here
Here we
because
go.
my number 3 ranked wide receiver is Alabama's wide receiver extraordinaire, Jerry Jeudy. He is my number 3 wide receiver in this class. Yeah, I know, and I stand by it. But here's the thing. Let me just preface it by saying this. T. Higgins, Jerry Jeudy, they are tier 1 wide receiver prospects for me, okay? So depending on landing spot, that's how I'm going to base my final grade. But at this point right now, if you're telling me I could have Jerry Jeudy or the 2 players that I have above him, I would take the 2 players above him. He is fantastic. He is phenomenal. He checks every box. He is an awesome separator. He's a mega producer, over 1,300 yards last year, 1,100 yards this year, 19.3 yard average of receptions. And then when you look at his analytical profile, from a market share standpoint, I mean, he receptions 22% as a sophomore, 26% market share of the receptions as a junior, 25% of the market share receiving yards for that Alabama team as a sophomore, 23% as a junior. Dominator rating over 20% each year, well, from his sophomore and junior season. So he checks all of those boxes. He can catch the ball. He's not a big wide receiver, but he's not like soft, right? I'm not calling him soft, but he's not the most physical wide receiver. A little more finesse, a little more technical, but I mean, just devastating stop-start ability. And here's something that a lot of people talk about. A lot of people talk about wide receivers' acceleration, how quick they get off the line. I think he is the fastest decelerator in this class, which that is a very, very important skill set. Think about those comeback routes. Think about those breaking ends. Stephon Diggs is really good at going from 100 miles an hour to 0 at the drop of a dime. And I think that is Jerry Jeudy. Again, a lot of people talk about acceleration. He's the fastest decelerator in this class, and I think that's a phenomenal skill set. I just like a couple of guys better than Jerry Jeudy. But for me, he's my number 3 rated wide receiver in this class, and I would take him in the first half. You talked about T. Higgins. He is a player that I would take in the first half of a single quarterback league.
Yeah, he's a guy that, Dynasty owners and players, and of course your casual fantasy football players, they're going to know a lot about in the next 2 to 3 months with the combine, with the draft coming around the corner. No doubt he goes round 1 for sure, likely a top 20 pick in the NFL draft. And, I kind of want to speak to that a little bit here. But before we do, I will just say I wholeheartedly agree with you, man. I was looking for some weaknesses to even put on my sheet of notes, and I literally put size ? Frame ? Like I'm not even sure I can really point to any. Okada, what are you hearing around the NFL Network in regards to the hype around Jerry Jeudy?
I would say it's probably not as hot at the network. Especially when guys like Bucky come around and chat. He's not too much of a believer in the Alabama guys in general, but then I think it is in the Dynasty community. So I actually kind of like that Ray brought this perspective. I think the Dynasty community is a little bit more obsessed with him maybe than we are. And it'll be really interesting where he goes, I think, because okay, so I don't think he'll fall this far, but I would like to see him go to the Patriots. I think the Patriots are going to have to go and get a great playmaker if they want to keep Tom Brady, because and it might be decided at that point, but they at least have to give him the impression or the promise that they're going to. He seems like a guy who's polished enough, who's an elite route runner, who could potentially learn that offense very quickly and be explosive and useful right out of the gate. But I think there's a lot of other teams that could certainly use him as well. So there's a lot of different places he could go and be productive for sure.
Yeah, Okada, you're going to have to keep wishing there, man. He's not falling that far.
No.
Unless
maybe we'll trade up.
Unless they make some moves on draft day. We'll see.
Very unlikely. It's not Bill Belichickian to do that. But
yes, of course. But let's talk about some other teams ahead of the Patriots in draft order there where he could go. Of course, we've been referencing the mock drafts all show long. We're going to get right into it here with Jerry Jeudy. DJ has him going 15th to the Broncos, Bucky 13th to the Colts. Very interesting landing spots. Obviously, with the Broncos, they have Courtland Sutton in place. Question marks at quarterback with Drew Lock entering his second season. Obviously, he didn't see the field a ton in year 1. But man, Drew Lock, if he had Courtland Sutton, who I think is a bona fide wide receiver 1 stud, and Jerry Jeudy, watch out, my lord.
Don't forget Noah Fant back there at tight end as well, who's just a glorified wide receiver playing in line.
Yeah, for sure. If that actually happens, I mean, I'm going to be pretty interested in Drew Lock as a cheaper, QB2, especially in a super flex league. I would love that a lot. How about for the Colts, Okada? What are your thoughts on that spot? Because Ty is getting a little bit older when it comes to a lot of injury history. Of course, he missed a lot of time last year. The quarterback situation is just as much of a question mark with Jacoby Brissett. We're not sure if he's the answer there. What are your thoughts on that? Because they did just take Paris Campbell last year in the second round, I believe.
Yeah, that honestly, that situation has more question marks for me than the Broncos situation does, and maybe more than a lot of other situations do, because we have no idea what they intend to do at quarterback. They haven't been very clear about it. We don't know if I don't think they want to sign Brissett. Really, they would rather go another direction. They may resort to that. If they do that, I don't know what to expect from Brissett. He looked incredible at the start of last year, and then he fell off a cliff, and dealt with some injury in between there. So. Yeah, and T.Y. Hilton, I don't even know what to expect there because he dealt with injuries a lot, was not very productive last year overall. They did just draft Paris Campbell, and it'll be interesting to see what he develops into. Obviously did not do much himself, so I think if they re-sign Marlon Mack, which they're talking about doing, they have one of the best offensive lines in the league. I think they might try to build up a better defense and rely more on that run game, and if they keep Brissett, have him as a game manager. And then it's not as an attractive place for me for a fantasy receiver, especially if Hilton is there healthy and taking up most of the targets. So I don't know if it's the best place for Jeudy to go. It might be a useful place for them, he might be a useful player for them. But I think I'd rather see him go somewhere else.
Yeah, Ray, what are your thoughts on the Colts situation in general, of course, with Jerry Jeudy potentially landing there? No.
That one... That's a gross situation because I don't think even with Jerry Jeudy, even with T.Y. Hilton, I don't think they want to throw the ball. I don't think that's what they want to do. That offensive line, they want to pound you into submission, and I don't blame you. If I had Quentin Nelson at right guard and Costanzo and all those other guys, Kelly at center, we're running the ball. I don't care who's at wide receiver. And then, T.Y. is getting older, but he can still stretch the field when healthy. I think you've got a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 in Jerry Jeudy, and that's not what we really want. The Broncos situation, I like that. I would really like him there. There's no way, and I agree with you. He would be Cortland Sutton's wide receiver 1 for Denver. Like, period. He is a bona fide wide receiver 1. Jerry Jeudy would be a good wide receiver 2 complement. A very good one. I could see him doing something similar to what Michael Gallup did for the Dallas Cowboys, and which is a very usable, consistent asset in fantasy football. But Indy, yuck. That's not a good situation. I don't think that'd be good at all.
Yeah. This and hopefully and takes our boy Jerry Jeudy to complement the pass catchers they have there. That would be a great fit. I would love that. Let's move on to your number 2, Ray. Hit us with who you've got there.
Yes, let's get into some fun talk. It is none other than the man himself, Jalen Reagor, wide receiver out of TCU, 5'11", 195. Listen, I don't name drop, but I talked to Jalen quite a bit. Jalen told me from the horse's mouth, and I asked him, I said, dude, I've heard Chuba Hubbard. I've heard Henry Ruggs. I've heard all these guys were the fastest in college football. He told me, Ray, there's nobody that's faster than him, and he's going to show it at the NFL Combine in the next couple of weeks. But he's a dynamic playmaker, a dynamic weapon, and I know if you just look at his raw data, you look at his stats from this past season, it's disgusting. I mean, he did absolutely nothing, but the TCU offense did absolutely nothing. So coming into the season off of almost 1,100-yard receiving season, 170 rushing yards, he ended his career with 43 receptions, 611 yards, and 5 TDs. I mean, that's like 2 games for CeeDee Lamb right there. I mean, literally, that's like a couple of games for CeeDee Lamb. But when you really look at what he did in comparison to the rest of his teammates, he commanded, I got it right here. Jalen Reagor, 20% of his team's receptions, 25% of his team's receiving yards, and 33% of his team's receiving touchdowns. So he still checked every analytical box as far as hitting those thresholds. The problem was TCU's offense was abysmal. I went to 3 games this year, didn't finish one of them, left because it was a waste of time. There were, and I've said this on another show, I've said this on my show, there were 3 games in 2019 where a wide receiver didn't catch a pass into the 6-minute mark in the second quarter. There were 2 or 3 games where Jalen Reagor wasn't targeted until the third quarter. What Sonny Cumbie did in that offense, he should have been fired right after the end of the season. It was gross misuse, malpractice, malfeasance, whatever the mal words you want to use. It was unwatched. Is a McWeapon. And here's the one thing that he does that we talked about 5 wide receivers. There's only one other receiver that we talked about that did what Jalen Reagor did, which is return punts. That is a very, very big key for me. If you're that good, if you're that talented, you're that quick and that agile, I say that the punt return is the hardest single play in football. I don't care what level it is, NFL, college, high school, peewee, to catch the punt, to have the wherewithal to find it, locate the ball, catch it, and then you have to make 1 or 2 people miss right away in order to get positive yards, unless it's like a line drive or they're punting from their end zone. It's the single hardest play in football, and he was a dynamic punt returner. He was dynamic out of the backfield, and I know a couple of people have comped him. For me, he reminds me of a more explosive version of Percy Harvin. That's who he reminds me of. I've heard some people say an angry Odell Beckham Jr. I'm not concerned about anything in his athletic profile whatsoever. He's durable. He's tough. He's fast. TCU timed him at a 4.29. We'll see what that computes to at Indy. We all know laser time is much different, but he's a dynamic weapon, and he comes from a pedigree. His father was a 2nd-round pick of the Kansas City Chiefs or the Denver Broncos. I know he spent time in Philly, but he's got that NFL pedigree to his game as well. Sure. And he is a dog. He is a dog. So Jalen Reagor is my number 2 wide receiver in this class.
Now, Ray, I can't let you just say that without saying how you know Jalen or what's the connection. And maybe you're not allowed to on the show. That's fine if you're not. But are you guys boys? Did you play against each other in high school? Like, what's the connection?
No. I'm way, way older than Jalen. I'll just say that I've seen him in high school, and yeah, I know him a little bit.
Okay.
We're
gotcha.
I wouldn't say we're boys because I'm older, but I know him, and I'm an advocate of him. But it's not that bias that's coming out, because if it was, I'd say he's my wide receiver 1. I'll tell him to his face, dude, I got you right behind CeeDee Lamb. I've told him that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He doesn't like it, but it is what it is.
Yeah. No, he's dynamic as it comes, man. With the ball in his hands, you could argue he's the top of the class from a playmaker perspective, and you talked about it with the punt returns there. One thing that I saw just in general with, and maybe it's the offense, like you were saying, with how poorly they were running the offense down there at TCU, is just, I don't know if they used him on an extended route tree, and that's not a knock by any means if it's not his fault. That's something that he'll just have to work out on the next level. And like you said, it's being quote unquote a knock with his ability to kind of beat press coverage and physical corners. You can work on it and you can get better at the next level.
But it's fair, though. I think that anybody if you're just scouting Reagor and you turn on his 2019 tape, that's a fair assessment to make. I mean, he didn't run a lot of routes last year. I mean, he didn't do a lot of anything last season. What I tell a lot of people is, outside of his punt returns and a couple of grabs versus Oklahoma State, I'd throw the whole 2019 tape out and just revert back to 2018. And that's not to make an excuse for him, but I would do the same thing with Laviska Shenault and the way that Colorado switched their offensive scheme this past season. You go back to 2018. The sophomore season is key, all right? Sophomore season in college, freshman year, you want to see your players come in right away and produce. But a lot of times, if they have it, they're going to show it after that first college football season of getting acclimated. Year 2, you want these guys to break out. In year 2, Jalen Reagor had a massive breakout. The offense was putrid. I don't want to make excuses for that. But even in a down season, he still hit those analytical thresholds and those data points that show wide receivers who hit those thresholds go on to score fantasy football points at a higher clip than those who don't.
Yeah, fair enough. I like that, just pointing that out, because I feel like, especially your casual dynasty players that don't watch a lot of college football, First off, shame on you. Watch the games; they're a blast. Second off, you look at like the ESPN box scores, and you probably only look at this past season, and you might see those numbers and be like, "Man, Jalen's a bum. Like he didn't do anything at TCU." And if you don't really dig into the tape or listen to smart guys like Ray, you might miss out on prospects like this. So with that being said, I mean, it kind of sounds like he might be a value in rookie drafts. Okada, is that kind of the vibe you're picking up on? If people are maybe looking past Jalen as a true top 3 wide receiver in this class?
Yeah, I think certainly, and I'm really glad that Ray brought up the dominator rating and market share, because I think that's something that a lot of casual fantasy players, dynasty listeners, even if they're not aware of, and the first thing they go to is to look at stats like you do with normal fantasy football, and that affects the perspective overall in dynasty. Then a guy like Reagor might be lower, whereas a guy who had 1,800 yards and 12 touchdowns is going to seem like the clear one, when really there's a lot more to be said about what the offense looked like, what their quarterback was like. We've seen receivers come from a place that just had awful quarterback play, and then all of a sudden they're amazing at the NFL. And it's like, wait a minute, where were these stats in college? And it's because they were in a place that did not at all flash or showcase their ability. Yeah, so that is a place to go for sure to potentially get a steal. So I really like that. And I think it might depend on where he goes as well. An offense that will use him, effectively and creatively is going to be important, potentially. So that'll be interesting to see too.
Yeah, speaking of landing spot, DJ doesn't even have him in the first round of his mock draft. However, Bucky does. He has him 30th to the Packers, which I think is really intriguing. I mean, right now it's Devontae Adams and a bunch of dudes, and Aaron Rodgers is currently he's still good, but he's definitely not how he was a few years ago when we talk about elite quarterbacks in the NFL. I think that's safe to say, just kind of watching him play. But if he has a guy like Jalen Reagor, I mean, that's super intriguing, given the fact that there's a ton of targets to go around in that offense, and they need playmakers for sure. Sorry, Jimmy Graham wasn't it. But Ray, I'll kick it over to you. Is that a landing spot that you think is intriguing for Jalen? And if so, do you see him fitting in well?
Yes, would love it. The reality is, though, if he does land with Green Bay, he will have to improve on just his route refinement, because Aaron Rodgers will relegate him to the sidelines if he does not. But I think that they need somebody outside of a Devontae Adams. I think that helps that entire offense. And we've seen Aaron Rodgers support multiple high-end wide receivers in fantasy football. So a player with his skill set, and I kind of like Allen Lazard, he's all right, but he's not a legitimate number 2 wide receiver. I think he's a better NFL player and does more for their offense on an NFL standpoint than fantasy. So I would love Reagor for the Green Bay Packers. There's a couple of other landing spots. I think Philly would fit well with him. I think a place like the New Orleans Saints would be a great landing spot as well, opposite of Michael Thomas. But after the combine, I'm pretty sure, and I've jokingly said this, if I had to pick a player who was going to break player profile, or just the bars would just be up sky high, it's going to be Reagor. At one point in time in his high school career, this football guy had the furthest long jump in the United States of America. I mean, that just shows how much burst and explosion that he has. He's going to jump high. He's going to run fast. He's going to look good in agility drills. And I'm sorry to bust your bubble, but in single quarterback leagues, he is not a value right now. Based on the mock drafts that McDowell is running right now, he's got an ADP of 8. The lowest that he's been drafted in 10 rookie drafts is 11, and the highest that he's gone is at pick 6. So I only anticipate that going up after the combine.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think that's a good point. You talked about what he can showcase, and his skill set is perfect for the combine. I mean, I think he's going to absolutely crush it and really challenge to be the most agile wide receiver that we see. Yeah. But of course, time will tell. We'll see here in a few weeks. All right, man. We have led up to this point. I think our listeners, at least that know Dynasty football, probably know which name is coming. But hit us with your number 1 wide receiver right now in this class.
I wish I had Gus Johnson to announce CeeDee Lamb's name, because Gus Johnson is like the best color analyst for hype and excitement that there is. But it's CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver out of Oklahoma. He's my wide receiver 1. I think he's just a dynamic, physical freak. He is everything that you want out of a wide receiver. He can run every route, his position versatility. Go watch the game versus Texas and watch how they set him up. You know, that jet sweep that Robert Woods runs all the time for the Rams. He can carry the ball out of the backfield. He returns punts. He was productive last year as the guy. He was productive 2 years before with Marquise Hollywood Brown. And I've said and maintained that I think he was the best wide receiver on that Oklahoma team, even when Marquise Brown was on the field. He's done it now with 3 different quarterbacks. Granted, all 3 of them are freaking fantastic. 2 Heisman Trophy winners, 2 number 1 overall picks, and then Jalen Hurts. And I'm not here to crap on Jalen Hurts because he's a fantastic college quarterback. I don't know what that's going to translate to for the NFL, but he's produced every single season that he's been at Oklahoma. The best run after the catch ability in this class. He's physical. What is he, 6'2"? I don't even know how tall he is. 6'2", listed. I think he's probably going to come in closer to 200 pounds, which would be good for him. He's got the frame to do it. Best body control, the best ball tracker in this class. He is not the route runner that Jerry Jeudy is. He does not decelerate and accelerate the way that Jalen Reagor does, but I would put CeeDee Lamb up against any wide receiver and take him even over Jalen Reagor, who I like a lot, and some other guys. I just think he's a phenomenal. None of these guys are bulletproof. None of these guys are bust proof. All of them have inherent risk. But I just don't see any way that CeeDee Lamb is going to flop at the next level. I just don't see it.
Yeah, he's an absolute stud. Not much to say from a negativity standpoint. Okada, are you hearing anything around the NFL Network? You mentioned with Jerry Jeudy, they're maybe not low on him, but aren't as hyped about him. Is that different with CeeDee Lamb?
Yes, I would say so. So to give just a little bit of context, as you kind of mentioned in passing in the beginning that Bucky is my boy. So Bucky Brooks, he coaches high school ball, and his offensive coordinator last year was a researcher that works in my department named Chris McNeil. We're boys too. He actually played as a wide receiver at Wyoming back in the day. So they're really close. And so Bucky will come by like at least 2 or 3 times a week and just hang around in the research sort of pod that we have and shoot the crap, if you will, about whatever's going on in the NFL, prospects, all this stuff. So we'll get to talk with him a lot about his perspectives. And yeah, he had some slightly negative things to say about Jerry Jeudy. He did not have any negative things to say about CeeDee Lamb. So I think he's pretty much the consensus number 1 from our side of things. It certainly seems to be the case across the board or in most places. I think my main question is, and Ray, I'll throw this to you. If he goes to your ideal landing spot, and you have to tell us what that is as well, how high is his immediate impact potentially for fantasy? Or how high could it be?
I wish I had I'm in a startup draft right now, and I know he went relatively early. I want to say like 4th round in a 1 quarterback startup league.
Wow.
But I think right out the gate, I think he's landing spot proof. I don't think it matters where he goes. I think you're looking at right out of the gates, a low end wide receiver 2 from the jump. And I'm being conservative there. I don't think it's long before he establishes, unless he lands in New Orleans, unless he lands in Green Bay with Michael Thomas or Devontae or Houston, somewhere like that, where there's no way he has a chance of being the number 1 right away. But I think it's going to be one of those things where sort of like, I think his rise could be even faster than A.J. Brown. I think even this year, some people thought, Corey Davis is really going to, he's the number 1, A.J. Brown's going to be the number 2. And then midway through the season, we realized, no. A.J. Brown is the number 1, even though towards the end he had a couple of down weeks. I think CeeDee Lamb right out of the gates, he's going to push to get the ball thrown to him a whole lot. So ideal landing spot, don't have one, don't care where he lands. I want him. He's my wide receiver 1. I really, really don't care. And it won't happen. But if he landed in Houston with Nuke Hopkins, with Deshaun Watson, with Will Fuller, the field stretch, it's just sky's the limit for all of those guys. And we've seen fantasy teams support multiple high-end wide receivers, multiple You got a wide receiver 1 high end, and then a very good mid-round wide receiver 2. And here's the thing, man, and you guys focus in redraft, so you know this better than me, but everybody looks at the wide receiver. There are only 12 wide receiver 1s. You unless you're very lucky, you don't have 3 or 4 of those hanging out on your roster in fantasy football. So you need consistent wide receiver 2s, consistent wide receiver 3s. So to say that CeeDee Lamb is a low end wide receiver 2 right out of the gates, you should be excited about that. Like, I need that consistency on my team to pair with Tyreek Hill, to pair with the Devontae Adams. So I think, I don't care where he lands. I really don't. I keep hearing Arizona. They've got bigger fish to fry, but it wouldn't surprise me if Cliff Kingsbury just put all the cards in and said, we're air raiding this thing out. Kyler, you run around, you'll be fine. We'll get better in the O-line somewhere else. But I think he's landing spot proof.
I was legitimately sitting here waiting for you to finish your sentence so that I could say it would be super interesting to see him go to Arizona, but there's no way it happens because they have to get offensive line help. You're
that
right.
Means they're going to take him. They're going to take him. They're going to take him now.
Yeah, it very well could be that they make the wrong choice and take him, and that would be super fun to see. But for the Cardinals' sake and for Kyler Murray's sake, because he's my boy, I'd rather see them get offensive line. But for CeeDee Lamb's sake and fantasy's sake, I might like to see that happen.
Yeah, if that happened, Okada, you would lose your mind. The biggest Kyler Murray fan there is. Of course, connecting with his former teammate would be unreal. I can only imagine how high you would push his ADP over the summer for Kyler Murray. But yeah, man, that was fun to talk about those landing spots and talk about Dynasty. One last question for you, Ray. Let's say he does land in Arizona or somewhere where he's the one right out of the gate. I mean, everyone is just so hyped about this running back class in the 2020, rookies. If he goes to like the perfect spot, is it outlandish to say he should be the 101 in rookie drafts?
No, it's not. It's not. The shelf life of running backs is so short. It's so short. And in Dynasty, the value of the wide receiver goes up exponentially year after year. Running back, unless you lucked up and got a Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley, even with Jonathan Taylor, I think after 2 years, I'd probably be trying to move him. 2 years of CeeDee Lamb, I'm just getting warmed up. I'm excited for the future. You know what I mean? So I don't think in single quarterback leagues, based on roster construction, it wouldn't shock me. And right now, based off of early rookie draft ADP, he is the consensus wide receiver 1. He's going right after Jonathan Taylor, ahead of Jerry Jeudy, ahead of Cam Akers, well ahead of Reagor and Higgins. So he's the number 4 ranked player off the board behind Taylor, Dobbins, and Swift. And I can definitely see him in certain leagues going number 1 overall.
Yeah, and I think, based off this discussion tonight, it might be warranted. So we will see what happens here over the next couple of weeks, of months. It's going to be an exciting time. Of course, it always is in Dynasty. Ray, thanks so much for coming on the show tonight, man. It was a blast having you on, picking your mind about these wide receiver prospects. And, for our listeners, again, who might have missed it at the start of the show, let our listeners know one more time where they can find you on Twitter. Let them know where they can find your work.
Yeah, on Twitter at RayGQ, Destination Devy Podcast. If you just search Destination Devy, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, I'm everywhere. And then I write and rank over at DLF. But connect with me on Twitter. Love engaging with folks. And I appreciate you guys for having me on this evening. It's been fun kind of talking about these guys and really talking about where they can land and their value. So I really enjoyed being on. And tell John to calm down with the Jonathan Taylor RB1 stuff. I mean, this guy, I love him, man. He's an exciting cat, man. But he loves him some Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and he loves him some freaking Jonathan Taylor.
Yes, he did. And that was our most recent episode, actually. Our last episode, John and I sat down. We talked about his top 5 running backs, and I swear, man, I've never seen someone smile so much when they talked about their number 1 running back, Jonathan Taylor.
Does he really look like a Julian Edelman, like in real?
Oh yeah,
oh
yes,
life?
a little bit, yeah. Playoff Julian
Edelman. He's a doppelganger, man. What's going on?
We'll have to just put his name when we do the live streams and the YouTube shows. We'll just have to put his name as Julian and see what people think.
Big Jules.
You get all the downloads, man. We got Edelman on tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, you're welcome. You have a new Twitter handle at Big Jules officially now. All right, we are officially off the rails. Okada, let the people know where they can find you.
At Matt Okada on the Twitters.
Absolutely. And of course, you can find us anywhere podcasts are found, on YouTube, social media at RedShirtsFFPod, TrophySmack.com for all your trophy, belts, and rings. Enter code RedShirts at checkout. You will get a free ring with purchase. All right, fellas, this was a blast. Looking forward to talking more fantasy with you all in the future. Until next time, we are the Red Shirts.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Red Shirts Fantasy Football Podcast. Hit us up on Twitter at RedShirtsFFPod and check out our website, redshirtsfantasyfootball.com.